All right, good morning, everyone. It's good to see many of you for the first time in a long while. I'm Sam Lawrence from NASA JSC. I'm the mission planning lead for the Science Mission Directorate component of Artemis programs, which is a fancy way of saying I deal a lot with the hardware vendors, try to make sure that their systems are compatible with and can actually implement important national objectives on the surface of the moon. Okay. So I want to clarify a point that was made in previously by my distinguished colleague, Dr. Noble. When you're in long meetings discussing space hardware and their impact on human destiny, it's never boring. Never is it ever boring. Just throwing that out there. So at the moment, there's intensive and iterative analytical processes are in progress right now between NASA and its contractors. So what's very different about Apollo and Artemis is that we actually are doing this in a very mode of public-private partnerships. So we have to work with our providers very closely to try to make sure they will actually do what we need or want them to do. And so it's very complicated. This interplay of vehicle design, the expected performance, the lunar environment, and mission objectives is a very, 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 very complicated thing. So right now there's a lot of analytical work that's in progress, particularly involving lunar reconnaissance orbiter data, to try to understand where exactly we can go and what we're going to do when we get there. In the context of recent of this iterative design process. So, and mission availability is what we're calling this. So this is a multidimensional challenge. It's the opportunity frequency at which the end-to-end mission can be reliably, safely conducted, viably with the systems we have and expect to have for Artemis. Now, it's also at this point important to remember that both SLS and Orion were not designed for the lunar mission. And that's a point that keeps coming up. Those were actually designed under the previous administration with many hardware choices fully baked into the system in a way that cannot be easily be changed for the asteroid retrieval mission. So just everyone needs to keep that in mind. So actual launch days, windows, periods, the fueling cadence, the availability of locks at the Cape, all of these play into mission availability. And there's a distinct set of additional constraints that must be incorporated when you're planning a human mission involving safety and crew operations and surface operations compared to science missions. So this is a very iterative process. It can be frustratingly so sometimes to outside viewers of what's happening, but it is a process and we're working our way through it right now. And we're all learning as part of this process. So again, Artemis is not Apollo. We're learning as we go, and we're trying to develop the best processes and establish firm precedents for future missions that will still continue to work for us. So the Artemis 3 Science Definition Team report very clearly stated that the decision on where Artemis 3 is going to go will be critically linked to the science return of the mission. So to coordinate these activities, NASA set up this cross-Artemis site selection analysis board. This is a multi-directorate coordination team that includes members from the three primary stakeholder mission directorates: Space Technology Mission Directorate, the Science Mission Directorate, and Exploration Systems Development Mission Directorate. So that's a 5-member board. It's their job they are tasked with providing the recommendations to agency leadership on where Artemis 3 and subsequent Artemis missions, possibly including the base camp, should be sited. So it's actually these 5 people who are making the decisions. And we're very fortunate to have Brad Bailey and Jake and Sarah deeply involved in all these discussions. Then there's a whole bunch of technical assessment teams, the most important of which are the Maya and the surface planning analysis teams. And then there's also separate analysis teams working for a human landing system project at Marshall. But there's a whole bunch of these teams. There's several hundred people working on this topic across the agency right now. You may have noticed there's 3 of them. There's the Science Objectives Assessment Team, and Lunar Data, the Artemis Geospatial Team. The slide needs to be updated a little bit. Those are the 3 groups that I primarily work with, along with Dr. Petro. So we're very closely linked with this process. Okay, so I don't want to belabor the point because you've all seen this slide too many times by this point, but I wanted to point out that there were some key landing regions considerations that we have to accommodate: proximity to the geographic South Pole. We have to be able to actually land there and operate there. We need to have a constant view of Earth for communications purposes. You need to have continuous sunlight throughout the expedition length of 6.5 days, give or take. We have to be able to land there accurately, so there have to be waypoints for navigation, and we have to have sufficient LRO data of the site to ensure safe landing and hazard assessments. And so when we actually factor all that in, a crack team of NASA experts wound up selecting these 13 regions of interest after a significant amount of analytical work had been done. This is primarily based on previous league reports and other science papers that have appeared in the interim. So here's where we're sort of at right now. So I'm going to just provide this as an update. You've seen this already. We showed this at League last year. We're somewhere around step 3, give or take. And the reason why that's going on is that our primary contractor for the Option A flight article and NASA have been engaged in a series of discussions describing design updates or design modifications to the Starship as we speak. So we're working our way through that process. So we're somewhere around step 3 is where we're at. So we just had the landing site workshop in April, which I think was very successful. And I think the community, I'll be talking about that this afternoon. That I got a lot out of that workshop, and so did the agency. So right now we're working to review with our vendor to adjust the figures of merit for the specifics of the Artemis 3 mission. And that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of the landing site selection process for Artemis 3. Now, as Sarah hinted at this morning, we're about to start the detailed mission planning processes for Artemis 4 later this year. So we are actually getting into the process of starting down this path for the next Artemis mission as well. And they're all going to be slightly different based on hardware changes. Okay, so that's my update right now.